I'm Nathan Blain. I'm from CEB. We're a management research company, about $1 billion. We have about half of that is research, and then we've got market-leading platforms in learning measurement and labor market analytics, talent development. And I'm going to be the moderator for today's session. So we're here to talk a little bit about what's changing and best practices in corporate learning. Really excited to have a chance to spend a little bit of time talking about the corporate environment and a natural extension of everything else that's happening at the conference. And I want to take a little bit of time just to set the context for the conversation today. We're operating in an environment with increasing skill gaps. We're operating in an environment where the amount of online content is proliferating rapidly. We're operating in an environment where the connection between talent and business outcomes is more powerful and more transparent than it's ever been. So let me unpack that just a little bit, actually, each of those. The skill gaps is something that you'll hear. This is something that you'll hear everywhere at this conference, in every room, in every session that's going on across these 3 days. By 2020, we will have 1 million more IT jobs available than we have computer science students in school. Today, in the labor markets, where we've got the top tech talent gaps, there are 13 positions for every 5 people, so there are 8 positions in the markets with the biggest gaps sitting unfilled today. That's stalling our growth. The second contextual factor that we talked about, the availability of online content dramatically changing the way people are learning, and we'll hear a lot about that today. No longer are people waiting for their manager to tell them what to learn. No longer are they browsing through L&D catalogs. They're out there actively pursuing content and learning experiences and conferences like this, looking at online content like Big Think and Lynda and Pluralsight and a variety of resources that we'll talk about today. So dramatically kind of different set of resources that are available for learners inside corporate environments. And then that connection between the performance of talent and business outcomes is more important than it's ever been. So, this is, you hear it over and over again, but this is the information economy. Talent really matters in the same way that land mattered in an agrarian economy and capital equipment mattered in a manufacturing economy. Talent really matters, and the performance of talent is increasingly the difference between companies that are competitive and are not. It drives performance in a way that's very visible to both leaders and investors and customers, and so it's increasingly important. So today, against that context, we are going to explore 4 questions. We're going to look at the changing business case for learning in corporate environments. So why is it that companies spend, in North America, employers are spending $160 billion a year on learning? Why do they do that? Why do they make that investment? And what return do they expect? And is that changing? Is that different than it used to be? Secondly, we'll look at the role of L&D and how that's changing. So who actually manages learning? Where does the stimulus from learning come from? Who delivers that learning? And we'll talk a little bit about how that's changing. We'll look at best practices in how to make online learning experiences engaging. And we'll talk a little bit about whether the proliferation of online content is making it easier or harder for employers to achieve their business outcomes. We'll have some different perspectives from the panel on that. We've got a great panel. So we've got next to me Dave Blake, who's the CEO and founder of Degree. Degree's a learner-centered portal built around employees, built around learners, for delivering, tracking, and managing all the learning experiences that they're consuming, not just those that are delivered to them by their employers. We've got Dave Cutler, who's the CEO and founder of mLevel, a SaaS platform for delivering bite-sized, game-based, engaging learning and delivering mobile learning content to corporate customers. We've got Stephen Bailey, who's the CEO and founder of ExecOnline, a firm that partners with leading business schools to deliver scalable, high-impact learning experiences for leaders in the middle of that corporate learning pyramid, where that balance between scale and impact is hard to deliver, and they figured that out. And then we've got Yoon, who's the head of learning strategy and curriculum at Google, which is a firm you may be familiar with. So we'll start with the business case for learning. And Stephen, I'm going to start with you, if I can. So So how is the business case changing, and what are employers hoping to achieve with the $160 billion that they're spending annually on learning?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think it's really changed a lot, even in the few years that we've been around. So I think you used to see a lot more cases for retention, sort of engagement. That was enough on the learning and development side. What we're seeing increasingly is that our business partners, and we typically sell into L&D, sort of heads of talent, they're being asked to much more sort of cleanly deliver a business impact case aligned to their stakeholders in a way that maybe wasn't the case recently. And I think particularly in that middle tier, because of the advent of online, there's a higher expectation about your ability to deliver into executive populations at a high quality and a high level of scale in a way that maybe wasn't the case previously. It was sort of understood that you had stuff for the top and you had stuff for the bottom, but that middle tier was really difficult to tackle. And I think that online is changing that in a lot of ways. And as a result, you have higher expectations around ability to tie back to business outcomes from business constituents.
Yeah. Let me turn to you saying on that topic on the shift from a retention-focused business case to an outcomes-focused business case. How do you see that at Google? Is that something that Google is looking to drive? Is that
Yeah, absolutely. So our team sits within the business, and when we started looking at the curriculum, we were trying to identify which areas we would focus on. And end of the day, it was all about opportunistic areas on revenue, right? So we really wanted to try and start measuring training, or not measuring, but tying training directly to business outcomes and revenue impact. So that's been a big shift for us. For us, primarily, we've had a knowledge gap around the products. So the story that we always tell is that our sellers, in particular, have to be pretty adept at selling over 200 various products. And so we took a lot of different signals, whether it was our customer Geist, our Google Geist, internal business signals, operations data, and we brought all that together to say what areas of the curriculum would we have to focus on in order to actually move the revenue in the most opportunistic places. Great.
And David, as you are talking to corporate customers out there, I'm sorry, Dave Cutler, I'm going to have to make that clear. As you're out there talking to corporate customers about the learning that they're doing and helping them to build business cases for the investments that they're making, I guess two questions. One, are you seeing that shift to an investment business case that's more focused on employee productivity and financial returns from that employee productivity? And then secondly, do you think that that's making L&D budgets more resilient? In the past, the L&D budgets were one of the first things to cut because they really didn't have a big impact on on financial outcomes. Are you seeing either of those two things?
Yeah, great question. So first of all, just to follow up on a couple of things that were said that ties to your question a little bit. We're seeing as well a much bigger focus around the ROI on learning. But also, I think what's causing some of the increases in cost or the amount of money being spent on training is related to the velocity at which business is changing in general. We've got a lot of companies, you mentioned the products you're putting out. A lot of companies are putting out products a lot faster. They've got to get training out to their employees a lot faster. And so the need for learning, the need for education of the employee base is increasing at a growing rate as well. Things are just expanding. So specifically as it relates to the role that learning and development plays in that and the way that money is being spent, certainly see an increase in that, certainly see the need to show the ROI on that investment. It's a really critical thing. The challenge, of course, becomes how do you measure that? And a lot of companies are having a really hard time measuring the impact on learning. Mm-hmm. And so I think if we can show a better linkage between knowledge and business results, then you'll be able to see a much bigger resilience in learning and development spend. The challenge right now is that it's not really there. And so while there's an increased need for learning and development, increased need for learning in corporations, the validation and evidence that learning and development is actually having a significant impact on results is still somewhat challenged. Yeah. And I think that, therefore, learning and development budgets are still somewhat at risk.
Yeah. Let me actually explore. We've got, saying you focus primarily on sales and Stephen primarily on leadership. Those are kind of the easiest and hardest, the opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of demonstrating that impact between the learning interventions or learning experiences that are being consumed and the business impact. Saying, let me start with you just to talk a little bit about how you build that business case. What data are you collecting? What are the outcomes you're looking at? just dive into that just a bit.
Yeah, for sure. So as I mentioned before, we're really trying to connect the training to the actual business outcomes. And so we're not trying to reinvent what the KPIs are for the business. That's very complicated. A lot of smart people in operations and strategy, they determine that. And so we're really trying to kind of slipstream into that and see where can we find the opportunities to move certain sales pods, for example. Are they lacking or are they struggling in a certain product line? Some big bets for Google are around mobile, programmatic selling and buying, et cetera. And so those are areas where we're targeting the learning and the learning paths to specific learners and learning pods, if you will. So those over time, we can see the actual revenue impact and the KPIs to see if there's a shift. There's definitely an argument to be had whether that's correlated or causality, but that's the direction that we're going towards. As Dave mentioned, really trying to get more clear on measuring those ROIs.
And Steve, what about in the leadership space?
Yeah, and I think, so we sort of started on the soft side with innovation, strategy, leadership sort of oriented courses. We have a couple courses that are more focused on kind of hard metrics like operations. But typically, I do think one of the things that Dave said is absolutely right, which is that the time to deliver impact has become super critical. So typically one of the big frustrations of the business is that L&D is thinking in an 18 to 24, maybe even 36-month time frame, and a business leader is thinking in a 6 to 12-month, can I move my number this year time frame? So by the time you actually deliver learning, it's often a whole new set of challenges and you have to kind of start over. So for us, a lot of what we focus on is applied learning. And so even if you take a softer subject like leadership or strategy or innovation, everyone in our programs is working on a personal case where they're applying the principles of the program to an opportunity or challenge. And every assignment is geared toward leaving at the end of the course with an implementation plan about what they're going to do around that challenge. And we go back 6 and 12 months after, and we can ask really specific questions about the particular sort of initiative that they've pushed forward versus more general questions that typically make it more difficult to sort of a certain ROI.
Yeah. Let me look at this from another perspective, which is the learner who's trying to execute on workflow on their desk, and turn to you, Dave Blake, and talk a little bit about the ROI of learning from the learner's perspective. So we've talked a little bit about corporate KPIs and what the company's trying to drive. Is there a different business case to be made for learner who's really the one spending their time, right? So the amount of money, the $160 billion, is dwarfed by the investment of time that learners are spending on learning experience, learning activities.
Yeah, I think as the conversation sort of shifts from, is the company KPIs tying learning to business outcomes, and as we go from sort of that, I think the conversation with companies and the learner are very different. They're both under enormous sort of change and innovation, but I actually think in a lot of ways that the conversation on the business side is fairly incremental in the innovations. We're getting more data, we're getting better data, we're able to start tying it tighter to business outcomes. But I actually think on the learner side, it's less incremental and more truly sort of transformative, that we're entering a more disruptive sort of turning point. And you zoomed us out pretty far when you set the context for all of this. I mean, you said it was, 5 of 8 sort of IT jobs aren't going to be filled. And if we think about, just on the political spectrum right now, there's serious conversations being had about, minimum income, and that's, 5 years ago, that would have been sort of crazy talk, and now, that's a serious political conversation. And why is that? It's because the transformation that's happening with talent, there is fear of, as innovation continues to drive, that there will be this bifurcation, that there will be an enormous part of the population that just isn't leveraged in the workforce. And then there will be a sort of exponential, cohort in the workforce that, continues to gain outsized sort of, incomes and rents in the market. And, we're at the very beginning of sort of, I think, what could become a very serious bifurcation. And as you take it back to learning and to training and to employers, right now, if I were to, ask the question, how much money did your employer give you to learn this year? And probably right now this year, the answer is probably most of us, none. I think we ask that question 2-3 years from now, and if your employer is not giving you thousands of dollars directly to you to learn, they will no longer be an employer of choice. I think it's going to come. I think it's going to come quickly. And, in that shift, right now, if your employer didn't give you health benefits, that is dramatic. That is serious. That's a pretty big, differentiator, sort of disqualifier in the marketplace. And as we think about companies like Google, they're not having problems filling their IT positions, and we see, so who is? We cite these stats on average, but it's, companies and people that aren't able to be competitive, companies that, and people that are. So I think that's going to be one of the biggest shifts is with learners. The CEO of AT&T recently said that if you're not learning 5 to 10 hours a week, you're going to be obsolete to us. And so that's measuring it in time, but I also think very soon, and goes back to how resilient our L&D budgets. Right now, still sort of not very, but it's because we're actually still in just this incremental conversation of, well, did it drive sales, this quarter? 2 years from now, the L&D budget is going to be what makes the difference between, do we have talent that we want and need, or don't we? Do we have a fighting chance to compete with the Googles of the world? And one of the first places your incoming recruits are going to ask is, how much money are you going to spend on me next year in my training and my learning?
Yeah, so I think it's an interesting topic. Where does the impetus for learning come from? So is it about, is it employees who are looking ahead and seeing where they'd like their career to go, or is it employers who are saying, these are the near-term business outcomes we're trying to drive? So as much as every strategic thinking CEO wants to think 5 to 10 years out, he's also thinking about this quarter, next quarter, and the quarter after that, and trying to align learning investments to make sure that they're meeting those near-term goals. So how do we balance that? And Dave Cutler, let me turn to you. How do you think about this alignment issue and making sure that learners who are empowered with money from their corporate learning and development department and online resources that they can access pretty freely and quickly and at their desk, and that on one side, and on the other side, general managers and CEOs who are trying to achieve business outcomes and are trying to align those learning investments to the things that they care most about?
It's a great question, and I completely agree with David's points. In addition to having a great name, it's got some good points as well. But I think what we're seeing here is actually, you mentioned bifurcation from an economic perspective. There's actually a bifurcation in the learning objectives as well, which I think is what you're alluding to, which is there's discretionary learning or learner-led learning, which is I, as an employee, I, as an individual, want to better myself. I want to better my skills. And for sure, that should be self-directed. And I think that's, we're not there right now, and I think we have to get that direction. It's not going to change the fact that there's still a lot of information that companies have that they need their employees to understand. Policies and procedures that are unique to that organization, new products that companies rolling out, that whether or not the individual necessarily is opting into that, they have to understand that content. So I think, and you alluded to this in the opening remarks as far as the role of L&D, this may be a good opportunity to refocus that role for L&D. I mean, L&D should probably be focused around the areas that are relevant to that business, that are unique to that business, and let the other areas, the more opt-in learning, be driven by the learner. Have them opt into better leadership skills, better development skills, design skills. Makes perfect sense. There's no reason why, since you use the AT&T example, no reason why AT&T should be teaching a developer how to code in Java. Doesn't make sense. There's no reason for that. That should be an open skill that is driven by the learner on a community-wide basis. However, new product rollouts of AT&T is certainly something AT&T needs to have control over. So there's a separation. There's probably going to be a separation in the way those things are delivered, the way those things are measured, the importance of those things, the transferability of those skills from one job to the next, et cetera. And that's not the case right now. A lot of larger enterprises still want to own and still feel like, well, I'm teaching you Java, but we have a our way of teaching Java. And I don't think that really makes a whole lot of sense. And I think that clarifying that role of what makes sense to be unique and custom versus what is an overall skill that's transferable across is a really important distinction, and that I think will help clarify the role of L&D moving forward.
Yeah. Let me follow up on L&D, because my guess is that a fair number of the people here are either running businesses that are selling to L&D or in L&D themselves, so I want to explore that just a little bit more deeply. You know, Dave Blake, I think at Degree has produced some information that says that about 20% of learning actually gets delivered by L&D today, as opposed to what it used to be, 80% or something like that. And so it's the market share for L&D in terms of learning delivery has dramatically declined over the last 10 to 15 years as the availability of online content has grown. What role is there in an environment where you've got an entire department full of designers and full of delivery folks? What role should L&D be playing in an environment where there's a much more limited scope for delivery of learning experiences?
Sure, maybe just a couple of thoughts, and then highlight some of the work that Sang has done at Google. But I think, in Dave's comments, I think that differentiation between what the company needs, the compliance, the company-oriented learning, and then sort of general career track skills is a valuable one. I think and I think we all get that. But actually, that insight of L&D might begin to sort of shape itself more that way is actually pretty insightful, because that's not how most L&D departments think about it, or look, or deal with budgets or headcount. I think as you think about think about what you learned last year. Think about how much of that your company knows. It is very, very little, and it's essentially whatever they administered to you, which is very, very little. And but what should it be? What is the role? And there is this ongoing demand for that company-oriented learning. It's the Disney way of doing things. It's the Google way of doing things. It's the Google products. That all sort of the time and attention and focus should be on the stuff that is proprietary, that only we as the L&D department can ultimately provide. And seeing sort of a window pane into some of the work that Sang's done recently, I think, is a really good sort of example of that.
Yeah, just building on that. So our team, when we go out and talk about what we do, we say we're L&D, but we actually don't sit in people dev. So externally, most people think of L&D as people dev. We actually sit in the business, so the global business unit. And more specifically, we sit within strategy and operations. So most people kind of scratch their heads, okay, L&D within strategy and ops. But that's where we live. And the main reason for that is we try to partner as much as possible. So we focus primarily on that proprietary content that we feel like is core to our sellers' knowledge base, that we know we need to deliver to them. We still partner with people dev around the skills development courses. So all the courses that they have still on offer, and new courses that we're trying to blend with the product and solutions training that we create, we're trying to find that partnership with people dev. So it's been a different model that so far, if you speak to the sellers or actual learners, it's resonated very strongly. So even some small examples, we have a certificate program. And so when we launched in February, we had 100% of all sellers were required to go after the 3 pillars of product certification that we launched. And our stretch goal, I think we were sandbagging a little bit. We put it at 25%. We actually had over 80% globally that completed these learning targets. So there was certainly a bit of a push from the top down. We had managers, various execs really leading from the front, posting on their G+ pages that they got their certificates. It's not unique, but we had a belt program. So we just sent out the first green belts, the karate-style belts. And so all these execs are posting their photos of these belts. You have sales pods globally. There's kind of this an extreme amount of competition within Google, right? So leaderboard, something as trivial and simple as that really seems to resonate, and people can see their pods and kind of see how they stacked globally. And so the Americas was really kind of lagging in the last maybe 3 weeks before the quarter ended, and then you started to see a lot of communication and push coming from the top. All of a sudden that number came up and they came in second globally. So as far as the impetus or what's the motivation, we've heard from sellers, like, this is the first time, and you guys might not believe this. I didn't believe it when I first joined Google. At least on the GBO side, our effort to deliver this e-learning certification program, it's kind of one of the first times we're doing it. Google, for the most part, all the training was done in person. You'd fly to a hub, you'd do it face-to-face. That was the norm, and that's what people said they preferred. But once we started to introduce an e-learning program on their own turf, on their own time, all the benefits you get with e-learning, especially at the kind of the learning the ecosystem level, that's really resonated with sellers. And they come and thank us, which I wasn't really expecting, but they do.
Let me explore this issue of the role of L&D just a little bit more and find out, Stephen, I'll turn to you in just a minute, find out a little bit more about what they can do to drive more value for the company. I think it's not dissimilar to what happened to centralized IT. So the IT function, pre-cloud computing and the dominance of SaaS delivery models, did a lot of work to host systems, to maintain on-prem, software. And all of that went away. That job went away when all of the applications went to the cloud. It feels like a similar model. So IT actually hasn't, it's not a smaller function anymore, but it has shifted its role pretty dramatically from some of the things that they've now outsourced to doing a lot more on vendor selection, a lot more on performance measurement, a lot more on security, a lot more on the things that they need to make sure that they're driving across all their applications. Do you see parallels for L&D and how their role might evolve?
Yeah, so I think, in the most innovative, I think, L&D organizations are recognizing, in our opinion, there are three key roles for L&D now, sort of in a changing world. One is alignment to the businesses and understanding business needs, right? Because that's something that the individual learner, right, is certainly going to be interested in. They're interested in performing well in their business, but it's going to be much more difficult for them to do. The second piece that I think is really important and kind of echoes some of the comments here is this role of curation and communication of options. So we work with an executive level audience that typically spans VP through manager. And so for that population, they actually want curation, right? They don't want to spend the time to go out and figure out which learning options are the best, or take a course and find out that it wasn't worth their time. And so they appreciate, right, that's sort of an overlap where you can drive business outcomes by aligning your curation to the business and then also serve your end executive customer. And then the third piece is finally measurement, and that's measurement both back to the business and then also giving individuals a sense of which programs help drive individual performance within their roles. So I think that changing landscape, a lot of L&D organizations haven't recognized it for sure, but a lot of organizations have and are starting to move a little bit in that direction, probably more slowly than we'd ideally like, but certainly it's starting to happen. I think the other thing that's happening is when you think about that stat around the number of programs that L&D, or the percentage of learning that L&D now delivers, I think there are two trends. One is individual learners are grabbing more content themselves. But the other big thing is that more and more of learning, and this is similar to what Sang is saying, is getting pushed out into the businesses, right? So if you think about business impact, if you're a CEO, I want to deliver business impact, well, I want my L&D function actually be closer to the businesses and serve them in a non-centralized way. And so, for example, one of our financial services clients, large organization, runs over 100 high potential programs outside of L&D that have been pushed out to the businesses. And then L&D still has its own programs, but those are shrinking every year relative to the programs that are being pushed out into the businesses. And the last thing I'd say is that because of online, it now means that you can serve a broader set of individuals within your organization in a way that will retain them. So, sort of previously it was a high potential sort of approach where you maybe take 1 or 2% of a very large population, call them high potentials, and then do everything you can to motivate them and incent them and retain them. Now you can sort of scale that up to 10x even with high quality programs that touch a much broader cross section. So those are some of the trends that we're seeing from the L&D function.
Yeah, it is interesting. The parallel that moved closer to business outcomes and moving L&D into the businesses a little bit more is something that you see in a lot of corporate functions as more and more of their service offering is delivered online and easily accessible and available to those business leaders. You mentioned one thing that I want to return to, which is the role of L&D in curating content. And this is, again, I'll turn to you, Dave Blake. This is an area where that tension really, the tension between harnessing the great power of learners going out there and it's the invisible hand of, of learners actually going to the market and finding what they need and consuming the learning experiences that they most want now, and balancing that with, how do we make sure that the stuff that they're consuming is the right stuff? How do we make sure that it's the right kinds of content? How do we make sure it drives the right outcome? How do you, is there a role for L&D in that curation in a learner-centered model?
Sure. I actually think the question was pretty eloquent. So, the invisible hand, the efficiency of it, I think, we'll maybe add this. I mean, there is still stuff employees have to know, and there aren't that many metrics in the L&D department. So, I mean, completion, number of hours of learning, it's not an especially sophisticated sort of metrics-driven organization all the time. And completion is certainly one of those. So if the employee has to know it, completion matters. But I actually think we sort of need to reframe it with everything else. And if employees aren't completing it, like that is an indication that it isn't valuable. And sort of embrace that. Quit trying to drive people through learning that they don't want, like there has to be a trust that people do want to solve their problems and they want to be good at their job and they want to progress in their careers. And when they face a challenge, we are increasingly well equipped to go out and to solve that and to, learn in the moment, to get, the resources to find it. And when, if you're trying to fix your kitchen sink, you go on YouTube and find a good video, you're going to watch it. Like the relevancy of that moment, that artifact, that problem, you're going to, and you're going to pull the slider back and watch it again, right? To see how he fixes it. Like, we've had such a paradigm of sort of push, that you said sort of the invisible hand of learning. We have to come to trust sort of that invisible hand of learning.
Could I just cut in with one thing there? Because I think I agree partly and disagree partly. So I agree that there's too much of a focus on pushing, right? So like, let's just cram this down your throat. On the other hand, I do think that, and we experience it in our programs, I would sort of use a different analogy. It's kind of like that coat closet you have in your house, right? That like you never clean out. You want to clean it out. It's a good idea to clean it out, but you don't clean it out until maybe like your in-laws are coming over, right? And then you do it. You're like, it's great, right? It's fantastic. I'm glad I did this. I feel much better about it. I think learning can be that way as well. We're super busy, right? We have immediate deliverables, right? And that's what L&D is competing against. Is sort of when you complete it, you look back on it and say, I'm glad I did that. In some cases, in other cases, you say it was a waste of my time, right? But presumably you want to find the cases where there is actually alignment and then provide people with a level of engagement and the right programmatic structures and the right sort of incentives and marketing and communication to actually have them take advantage of it and maybe pull up from, sort of whatever is right in front of them at that particular moment.
Well, it's a question also of the changing dynamic of the learner themselves. I mean, when I'm old, when I started my work, I was told, you're going to learn this stuff. Here, go sit in a corner for 12, 14, whatever, how many hours it takes, and learn this stuff. And I said, yes, sir, thank you, appreciate it, thanks for the paycheck. It's different now. People want to understand the purpose of what they're doing. People want to understand the meaning behind things. But certain things are tough to do. Understanding compliance. There's an inherent component of, I understand financial responsibility and things like that, but there's certain learning that is very challenging to truly find purpose in. And I think that's where we have a need. The learning development team has to be able to help connect those dots of what is the purpose, why is this important, why is this relevant to you, why is this relevant to our business. It's when that connection is not made that I think we have the most challenges, where the connection is not made between why we're taking this training, what it means to me, what it means to my job. That's when it becomes, it's worthless to me. But even the most sometimes mundane training has purpose and has meaning that has to be explained. And I think we also now have vehicles by which we can make it more interesting. Sang mentioned leaderboards and things like that. We have vehicles now to bring more interest and more excitement into the training, even when it may not be content that's 100% exciting in and of itself.
Can I respond to the challenge? Positive.
The coat closet challenge.
All right, I'll see the coat closet. Raise you another kitchen sink. I do think it is a great point. It is a fantastic point. There is a big difference between foundational learning and just-in-time learning, because there's no amount of 7-minute YouTube videos, on Angular or JavaScript that's going to help me if I don't have the foundation of web development and computer science. And that is acquired not, 7-minute videos at a time. That's acquired months of scaffolded, developed curriculum at a time, with mentorship and coaching and teachers and professors. And so I think it's a distinction between foundational learning and, just in time or just because learning. But that said, I think even our foundational learning is going to find efficiencies, and we need to let go. Because right now what it looks like is I take, so I've got to get 1,200 people, skilled up, and I'm going to send all of them to, training this fall. And what is the chance that for 1,200 people to go do a program at the same time, that it's, equally relevant to all of them in that moment in time? And what we need is, and it's been impossible in the past to get beyond administering learning in huge chunks in, both of time and format, and now it is possible. Now with some, faith and some trust, I can let people, once they get there, once they're ready, once, they see a lapse in sort of, the demands on themselves, when they see opportunities to empower them to go get those skills in those moments. And I think, we will continue to see, rather than big cohorts, big programs, as we look years out into the future, every single person's learning stream and mix of foundations and programs and platforms and providers, it's going to be more and more unique, less and less standardized.
Yeah, and I think that's true to some extent. I mean, if you look at, for example, what GE is doing with Brilliant University, right, where they've actually taken kind of the Crotonville traditional, bring everyone together. I mean, no company that's spent $1 billion a year, right, on development, and that's what a very traditional type of approach is now sort of, as they move into online, saying, let's take more of a curated approach, right, and let's open up a range of different options. And now we're going to choose best-in-class providers to partner with. Right? And so that every program is going to be in some sense vetted, right? But we're going to give you significant control over your ability to both choose when you learn as well as what you learn. That being said, the way they think about it, which is sort of the way we think about it as well, right, is that there are moments in time for both, right? And so when you're thinking about transformations, right, and you want to, at a corporate level, you want to change people's way of thinking about something. You want to create alignment around particular strategic outcomes. There is a time and a place for bringing people together at the same time. It can be online, even it doesn't have to all be in person, right, to drive some of those sorts of initiatives. But day-to-day learning, I think, I absolutely agree, right, is becoming much more kind of rationalized in terms of meeting people where they are, both in terms of the content and the time and when they consume it.
Yeah, it's the other topic I wanted to explore with you all is, are there places where different types of learning are more effective, and different types of learning objectives that you have are more, a place where online learning might be more effective, where social learning might be more effective, where instructor-led training might be more effective. Do you have perspectives? And we've been talking about it a little bit as, we've been talking about how to think about what gets learner-directed versus L&D directed, but now switching the filter a little bit just to talk about the delivery mechanism for the learning experience and what kind of learning experience is most effective for a particular type of outcome. Saying, let me start with you. Do you, in the work that you're doing at Google, do you employ different types of delivery models, and how do you decide which delivery model to use at Google?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a hot topic, hot discussion. I don't think it's an either-or, especially when you say something like social learning. So in our first phase, we've launched this green level, which is 100% of all sellers have learning targets that they need to achieve. And we're primarily delivering through web-based e-learning. Very little video at this point, a lot of web content that we've produced in-house. As you move a little bit higher at the blue level, which is more the kind of developing into that trusted advisor, if you will, this is about 50% of the sales force. And this is where we're starting to introduce more workshops. Right? So again, traditionally these were always done in person, in the same co-located place. we're really trying to now have the conversation around how can we have those more virtual, right? And then when you get to the black level, which is only about 5% of the workforce, these are the thought leaders, people doing TED Talks, et cetera, more of our senior sales force, there we really want to start creating more of that high-touch experience, right? So this is something that might be more akin that you would find in an executive education type program. We really want the black level sellers to feel like it's kind of an exclusive group, they're really tapped for their knowledge, et cetera. And we want the projects to be as experiential and as action-oriented as possible. You mentioned earlier, as far as like ROI and how you make this more impactful, when we started talking about the black level experience, a lot of sellers would come back and tell us, like, nobody's going to do those projects. Nobody's going to do the pre-work. We already go through these programs, and we know we're supposed to do it, but we don't have time. We're too busy. But from my perspective, I feel like if you can make that one-to-one connection that's actually work-driven, work directly linked, bring a brief, bring an RFP that you're responding to. You're going to get real feedback from your colleagues, from your peers, et cetera. We really feel like that's going to move the needle. So again, as you move up and from the green to the black level, it's a smaller number of sellers that you're addressing. So you're not as concerned about the scalability challenge, and the experience gets much more high touch and experiential.
Now, Stephen, you wrestle with this in kind of design of your programs. How much of it is online? How much of it's delivered in person? Do you have a perspective on how to make that distinction?
Yeah. So all of our programs are 100% online. That being said, they get embedded often into broader programs that might include in-person components. So that's always a question that we get from clients around what the right mix looks like, whether they should replace, for example, a 3-day in-person piece of a 12-month program with this online delivery model over sort of 6 weeks or 3 weeks, which is the typical length of our programs. I think one thing that Seng said as it relates to learning design that I think is really critical is the ability to tie it back to real things that individuals are working on, and as a result to allow them to take some control over their learning experience. So everyone in our programs chooses their own personal case. And so even though they're looking at, they're looking at the same lecture videos and they've got a sort of a similar format to other individuals that are going through the program with them, they're tailoring that experience to their own needs. And I think that's what engages them and grabs them versus saying, this is really interesting, but at the end of the day, I have no idea how I'm going to apply it back when I get into the organization. So I think that ownership piece, to David's earlier point, is super important, right? So that you feel like you're getting sort of some personal value.
Yeah. And how important when you're developing new skills, acquiring new skills, how important is peer feedback and peer interaction in that skill acquisition process, the ability to have a chance to practice and then get some peer feedback on that?
Yeah, what we found is that peer feedback is super valuable. It can actually be better than sort of coach feedback, particularly if the peers know your business. Yeah. That being said, it requires the right set of rubrics. So you can't just say, here's someone's personal case, give them feedback, right? They're not equipped to do that. If you give them powerful rubrics to say, okay, we have a buddy system in our program. So there are multiple different social structures, one of which is a buddy from your own company that's kind of your running partner through the program. Yep. And those buddies are provided with rubrics where they can actually sort of in a structured way bring to light things that may or may not be sort of covered in the personal case that they might want to revise or they might want to change. And so that combination of peer with structure we find works particularly well versus imposing someone potentially as a coach where they're super smart, but it's just going to be hard for them to get smart on your business in a way that's going to allow kind of immediate feedback.
And Dave Blake, as learners are engaged in learning on their own, are there opportunities, are there tools that are available for people to get feedback from peers as they're engaged in their own independent learning journeys that you see? Are there opportunities to incorporate some of these learning techniques into learner-directed?
I think in the market we are seeing an increase of sort of hybrid programs, and by hybrid don't mean online, offline means sort of asynchronous content with synchronous sort of social experiences. And I think that's increasing, and even models where it's not just sort of the peer group, but that there is sort of scaffolded with coaches, with mentors in addition. I think Degreed, we saw the problem and set out to solve the insight of learning happens essentially in islands or silos. And, it's easy to look at the case of I might be learning Angular on Pluralsight while my friend is learning it on lynda.com. And because we are learning it in two different sort of silos, we don't have the opportunity to socialize our learning together. Even though both are independently really well, developed and sort of have social scaffolding within themselves. And so I do think, that's something that Degreed facilitates, and something that I think organizations also have an opportunity to help facilitate is, curriculums will span across platforms, across providers, but, the organization has the opportunity to scaffold the experience as it transitions between programs and between content.
And Dave Cutler, you've spent a lot of time learning how to deliver online learning experiences that are engaging and compelling. And is there anything that you found particularly useful, whether it be kind of the stuff that Zhang was talking about around gamification and engaging people's competitive instincts, or whether it was around peer-to-peer coaching, or is there anything that you've seen most effective?
Yeah, definitely. So to your earlier point on the blended learning, I definitely see there's strong value mixing modalities of online learning, complementing that with classroom-based learning. How can you make the classroom-based learning more effective? Mm-hmm. There's a lot of research that's been done around that to show how you can make that more effective with complementary training, for sure. The reality, though, from an engagement perspective is different people are engaged different ways. Mm-hmm. And no one is engaged through the same exact metrics that someone else is. Some people, it's the competition aspect. Some people, it's the pure joy of learning. Some people, they want some fun and meaning and purpose in it. Some people, it's to get the promotion. And so I think the trick is to make sure that you have, when you are deploying learning, when you have learning available, that you understand that different people are motivated to pursue that in different ways. And allowing that engagement to happen the way the user needs it to happen. So if they're looking to get recognition for what they're doing, there should be a mechanism for them to get recognition. If they're looking to have this relate to a promotion or to a raise or salary increase, there should be some clear indication as to how this ties to their career development. And so those things, and some of those are digital in the sense that they can happen through the actual tool itself. Some of them are from the management, some of them are from leaders. There's a variety of different ways, but those all have to come together to engage the actual individual in that learning to make sure that the purpose for why they're there is being recognized and how they're being recognized in that learning.
Okay, great. We've got about 3 minutes left, and I wanted to make sure that we save enough time for any questions in the audiences. Go ahead, a couple on this side.
I'm wondering if you guys have thought about leveraging the kinds of technologies that are being used in higher ed today. So for example, we have a lot of early alert systems, a lot of retention systems. We have student success coaches. We've got the instructors set up to be able to monitor who's logging in, who's not completing assignments. And then there's a mechanism by which they can reach out to those students and help them succeed. I don't know of any model in corporate training at L&D where folks are doing that, probably for good reason. But I wanted to pose it to you guys to see if you thought about it, if you're hearing that, and what your reactions are to
Can I hit that back?
The approaches that higher ed is taking for a corporate L&D setting.
In 30 seconds, I'll hit that back at you. I think higher education is increasingly irrelevant, and so we have to scaffold it that way. I think the great benefit of corporate training is that it's immediately relevant to my life, and compliance is certainly the exception, but otherwise, I think corporate training, as I've been exposed to both academia and corporate training, it doesn't suffer from the same problems.
Yeah, I would say we're not using early warning systems that are coming from higher ed. We're actually building our own analytics, right, and our own dashboards. So we'll look at right down to the LDAP level, the individual. We can see who's logged into the system, who hasn't, which pods, which regions, et cetera. And we'll have separate communications that will go out to those groups, kind of a soft nudge, if you will. And the other thing I wanted to mention is half of our team of 40 is actually operations, and a lot of it is communications, activation, et cetera, which is pretty new for me, joining a team like this. And over the last year, I've seen where that power is because we've got that analytics kind of mindset first.
We're very much the same way as well. I mean, we're very sophisticated. We have a sort of, our completion rates are 92% for our programs, and they're blended learning experiences. And a lot of that is understanding who's engaged in what activities at the right times to make sure they complete successfully.
I'll take one more question. I'm going to chime in on that as well, which is, I actually think that question just is one of the great benefits of this conference. As a little plug for the conference, is you do get a chance to cross-pollinate, ideas from different sectors, and they are, pursuing very different approaches. They're very different problems, but it is a good opportunity to do that. You had a question?
You premised the discussion here today on the skills gap and the number of positions that won't get filled, and without bringing in the H-1B issue. All of the discussion is about in-service training, but that seems very divergent from the skills gap, unless we're now going to assume, and I'm curious what these gentlemen think, is it now the employer's responsibility to hire people and give them training to meet the job demands, or, notwithstanding the comment about higher ed not being relevant, are we still expecting people to come forward with a minimum level of credential that we're going to further skill up, particularly in the tech areas where I don't presume employers want to take on the role of providing what had previously been a higher ed requirement?
Yeah, I mean, first, I'll chime in and then pass it off. But for sure, it's an environment where you actually employers do have to build their own capability as opposed to buy that capability. There's less. You can't solve those skill gap problems with hiring answers anymore. You actually have to take on building those skills inside your company, which is why I think companies are increasingly looking for new tools to be able to take on large-scale development of skills, both at a kind of a large-scale level, but also plugging in gaps where they've got smaller skill gaps. I don't know if anybody on the...
Completely agree.
Yeah.
I think the case that we see is we have to get more productivity out of our existing. We have to retain them, right? And we have to get more productivity out of them and motivate them more than ever before to our business outcomes. So I think that talent shortage really drives a lot of that thinking.
And I'm not saying that companies are good at it yet, but they're going to have to get good at it because the pace of technology change. You may hire one thing one year, but next year you need something different. You've got to be able to grow your people and grow their skills, and something that companies are going to have to get a lot better at doing than they're doing right now.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for your questions, thank you for your attendance, and thanks to our panelists for sharing their perspectives.